Welcome to From Chaos to Code, Rebuilding the Iron Mind, where we talk about the real side of men's health. Not the Instagram highlight reel, not the fake stoicism, but the honest effects that happen when life hits you harder than any workout ever could. I'm your host, Ricardo, and I've lived a few different lives. Teacher, property manager, MMA promoter, garage mechanic, handyman, empath. I've been the man everyone leans on, the one who fixes things. Until the weight of it all almost broke me. Here, we want to talk about what that really costs. When being the strong one becomes survival instead of strength. How burnout, silence, and pride slowly eat away at you until you realize you've built armor so thick that you can't even breathe under it. This isn't about weakness, it's about rebuilding. Learning that real strength isn't about how much you can carry. It's about knowing when to set it down. So let's start there, with the cost of being the strong one and what it actually takes to reclaim your iron mind. Welcome to part 2 of our 3-part podcast segment. This is season 1, episode 2, part 2 of what I learned from losing myself. Recognizing and rebuilding boundaries, a 3-part discussion. The second portion of this is going to be titled Healthy Boundaries Every Man Should Have in Relationships. The very first healthy boundary is an emotional boundary. Protecting your peace. You are not her emotional regulator. You can support your partner's emotions, but you are not responsible for fixing them. Don't ever feel you have to apologize for feelings that are not yours. The problem with this, and what often happens, is that if you start regulating someone else's emotions, it often turns into the idea of guilt manipulation. Now, guilt manipulation does not necessarily have to be external. It could almost be an internal responsibility you're giving yourself because you feel you owe it to your partner in order to regulate their emotions. Now, worst case scenario is that guilt manipulation is external. And that often starts with, "You made me feel." With your partner placing the blame on you for how they are feeling. Now that's projection. That's not accountability. No one is responsible for your feelings and dealing with them but yourself. So if you find that your partner is articulating blame towards you, once again, they are projecting onto you. They're not taking accountability. Now, here's my caveat, here's my warning. If you do have a partner who communicates well and they say, "I feel this way because," if that turns into projection, "I feel this way because you did this," well, that's just an articulate way of guilt manipulation. And often when we're faced with these sort of intense feelings, we feel that in the conflict, we have to solve it at that moment. But you don't. You have the right to step away from conflict. Walking away to cool off is emotional discipline, not avoidance, especially in a relationship. You can say to your partner, "I'm not ready to talk about this right now." Emotional timing matters. If you're reacting in chaos, you're going to feed the chaos. Let me say that again. If you react in chaos, you're going to feed the chaos. Remember, the whole entire point of this content of this podcast is the title. We are moving from chaos back towards that code that you have. So if you're walking away, it's emotional discipline. It's not avoidance, as long as you are willing and able to bring this up in the future. Let me remind you that your needs matter too. Supporting your partner does not mean silencing yourself to keep peace. As I brought up in the first part of this 3-part series, I often found myself silencing myself for the sake of the relationship. I felt that if I was quiet, I was showing some sort of emotional discipline. But I was doing so in silencing myself. It wasn't just cooling away from the conversation. It was completely avoiding it. Our second boundary is communication boundary. How to protect your dialogue from dysfunction. You can stop any conversation that turns disrespectful. Do not become a mirror for that person's disrespect. If you feel that you've been disrespected or it's something blatantly obvious, you can tell them straight up, I'm willing to talk, but not like this. And keep in mind, a tactic that a manipulative person will use is they expect you to reply instantaneously. You're not obligated to reply instantaneously. You're not obligated to reply on the spot or when they want you to. Constant check-ins breed control, not connection. Your reply should be something that's thought out, something that's honest, and something that is authentic. If your partner can't respect that, well, once again, that's a control tactic. Oftentimes when it comes to dialogue, people feel that a partnership should have complete and utter transparency in every aspect. But you're an independent adult. Privacy is not secrecy. You can have personal space, you can have texts, you can have journals, you can have solo time. It doesn't mean that you're hiding something. If your partner thinks that you're hiding something with no reason for it, then that's something that needs to be discussed, because personal space is your autonomous independence. That's your right as an adult. Worst case scenario is I've heard justifications where they have had prior experiences with other individuals having affairs, having some sort of mistrust. And so they use that as an excuse to invade your personal space and not give you that idea of privacy. That's not up to you. That's up to them to come to terms with that. Now, granted, there are relationships that have had aspects of this infidelity, whether it be big or small, and that's something that you'll have to work through with your partner if that has been something in the past, because relationships are built on trust. And you have to have that mutual trust that personal space doesn't mean you're hiding things. Now, one of the dialogue aspects I've come into play with numerous times in my experience is that idea of emotional blackmail. The if lines, the cause and effect. If you loved me, you would. If you're finding that there's some sort of attachment there, that there has to be some sort of preface to what you receive, that's manipulation. That's not communication. Now, the big part of conversations between partners is that people feel disagreement is something that can't happen. There should be a sort of compatibility where you agree in all aspects because this is your perfect person and you're an absolute reflection of each other. Once again, you are autonomous. You are independent. You have your own thoughts. If there's some sort of irreconcilable differences, and yes, I use that term for the preface to divorce, then maybe you shouldn't be together. But if it's just daily disagreements, that doesn't mean that you disrespect the other person. Healthy couples can hold two different truths without some sort of war happening. You don't necessarily have to agree with your partner. And if your partner disagrees with you, you have to make space for that disagreement. Going back to that idea of autonomy, let's talk about physical and social boundaries and how to protect autonomy. If partnerships were able to exist without any sort of external influences, external communications, then it would just be this confirmation bubble. And honestly, I don't think they'd work out as well. Because you need those outside sources. You need that outside communication for yourself and for your partner's growth. As I stated before, I was told that it is your life, your partner's life, and the relationship. It's a triangle, and each part of that triangle has to be fully developed for a relationship to be able to happen. You can see your friends and family without permission. You don't need to run this by your partner first. Your independence is vital. If you find that you're being isolated, whether it's a self-isolation because you don't want to deal with the fallout of the argument, or whether it's an external articulation of you can't, you shouldn't, why did you, that isolation is a red flag. Now, of course, we come to the stereotypical aspect of physical and social boundaries when it comes to the opposite sex. I'm going to say this, and I mean this for any listeners who might be male or female, even though I know this podcast is geared towards my strong men. You can have opposite sex friendships rooted in respect. I'll say that again. You can have opposite sex friendships that are rooted in respect. Rooted in respect means there's no crossing the lines. Those individuals of the opposite sex and your partner or yourself are not going past anything that your partner would find to be disrespectful. Now, keep in mind, that's not their interpretation of disrespect. I'm talking blatant disrespect. The majority of individuals would agree is not appropriate behavior. If you find that your partner is jealous, that's their responsibility to regulate. And this goes both ways. If you find that you're being jealous, that is your responsibility to regulate. And I know I say that with a sort of intensity behind it. I'm not just going to leave you with some sort of verbal intensity and stop there for the dramatic effect. I want you to ask yourself, why are you jealous? Is it a sort of insecurity? Is there maybe something in the other person that you don't have or you wish you had? Do you just need to eat? Have you been sleeping? I want you to ask yourself these minor questions of why you're jealous. Because once again, jealousy is your partner's responsibility to regulate. But if you find that you're being jealous, it is also your responsibility to regulate. Because what often happens when people are jealous is they try to shrink the other person's life. I don't like this female friend you have, therefore you cannot see or should not see this female friend. If you find that a partner is shrinking your life, that's not a healthy relationship. You should be able to live that full life as long as all of those friendships are rooted in respect. This next one I'm going to say goes both ways. Now, once again, this is for men. But we also have to have a self-reflection. And you have to have this mutual respect for your partner too. That appearance and body are an individual's choice. Whether it's how much time you're spending in the gym, what you're deciding to eat, whether you choose to get tattoos or piercings, what sort of clothing people are wearing, no one gets to dictate them. I facetiously said when someone has criticized me for something that I decided to do, my body, my choice. And I know that's not the proper application of it, but all I'm trying to say is that, yeah, it's a completely independent decision for anything I choose to do. That also goes for your partner. If your partner has a certain appearance that they enjoy and they feel comfortable in that appearance, and that's a part of their personality, you need to make sure that you respect their autonomy in those choices. Nobody gets to dictate what you do with your body but you. Here's my caveat, here's my warning with that. If your partner is doing something that is detrimental to their health, detrimental to their social interactions, if I worked a professional job and got a tattoo on my forehead, for instance, that's where as a partner you need to step in and you need to say something. You can't dictate what they'll do, but you need to express your concerns, especially when it comes to health. That's the only warning I'll give with this, where your opinion is in the best interest of them. You still can't tell them what to do and they shouldn't be telling you what to do. But by that same standpoint, if you are doing something unhealthy and your partner speaks up, I'd assume they have your best interest in mind. Let's talk about personal property. Your partner is not your property, and you are not theirs. Being a couple in public doesn't mean that you need to be holding hands the entire time. This isn't junior high. Being a couple doesn't mean that when you're out together, you have to be attached to the hip. Being a couple doesn't mean that you have to forfeit individuality when you're out. I'd still check in on my partner. I'd still make sure there's some sort of caress or some sort of physical touch during times we're out. I'd make sure there's a check-in of how the night's going. But you don't need to be attached at the hip to your partner, nor should they be expecting that from you. Let's talk about our fourth piece of advice: time and energy boundaries. How do you protect your focus? Once again, you're autonomous, you're in charge, you decide how you spend your time. Love doesn't mean that you have to have access 24/7. Love doesn't mean that they have to have access to you 24/7. Balance does. You can have hobbies, interests, and solitude. Being alone recharges masculinity. It doesn't threaten connection. If you've ever encountered a partner who doesn't have a sort of purpose or interests or hobbies, they tend to focus all of their time on you because they expect you to fill these voids they don't have in life, or pardon me, that they have in life. But as men, we need alone time to recharge our masculinity. We need alone time to reflect. We need alone time to work on ourselves. We need alone time in order to deal with the stresses that we have in life. Now, as a strong man, what do you have? You have work, you have purpose in life. If you don't have either of those two, I'm sorry, you're not a strong individual. Go find purpose, whatever that might be. That work and purpose come first. Your partner is not your purpose. They are a part of your life. They add to your life. But a strong man needs a mission. I'll say this though. If you have a mission, you're focused on work, you're focused on purpose, as you should be, you should never feel guilty or be made to feel guilty for having one, because that is what solidifies the base of your masculinity. Now, there's a difference between having work and purpose coming first, having a mission, and being an absolute workaholic where it's detrimental to everything. You need to find that balance, and that might look different for everybody else. But balance comes from having part of the partnership. Putting work and purpose first, having hobbies, having interest, and once again, having the idea of solitude. Love isn't 24/7 check-in. You should never be required to check in constantly. You can let your partner know where you are. You can let your partner know what you're doing. If you have a bit more of a risky lifestyle, check-ins might be something appropriate. But you're not required to check in constantly. If you find that your partner is suspicious when you're not around, that's a breach of trust. If you're not doing anything to give them that suspicion, that's something that they are going to need to deal with, just like jealousy. So when it comes to that idea of being accountable, this is our fifth boundary. There's accountability boundaries in how we protect mutual respect. You can and you should call out any double standards. If it's not okay for me, it's not okay for you. Here's my warning with that, and I found this happening in the past, that it becomes retaliatory. In other words, your partner says you can't do something, so you say, all right, you can't do that either. And then it just becomes a complete breakdown where now there's all these parameters in place, and no one can really feel free to do anything. It shouldn't be conflictory. It should just be if there's a mutual respect for what someone is able to do, the other person should also have that mutual respect. And mutual respect also comes with dialogue. You don't have to absorb any insults. Often people in an argument resort to a sort of straw man insulting. They insult the person rather than discuss what's happening in front of them. If you find that you've been insulted or you're being insulted or they're hitting somewhere very sensitive to you, don't retaliate with the same. Articulate, I don't accept being spoken to like that. That's putting up a boundary. And you can end a conversation. You can leave if it starts to get toxic. Leaving a room, closing a chat, hanging up a phone. That all protects the relationship. And more importantly than protecting the relationship, that protects your sanity. If you find that your partner is constantly doing those sorts of things and insulting you or escalating those sorts of insults, what first might have been teasing escalates to something a bit more blatant, then they start to use something you've confessed or confided to them against you, you need to leave that conversation immediately. And if you find your partner is constantly apologizing, I'm sorry. Well, apologies require changed behavior. Sorry without growth is emotional manipulation. By the way, gentlemen, all of these apply to you too. I know that I say these in relation to a partnership, And that's me speaking from past experience when it comes to it, because if you're listening to this back to back with the first portion of our podcast, I give some examples of this. But when it comes down to it, if you're a strong man and you're recovering, you need to also make sure that your code is being followed. And your code is ensuring reciprocal, respective behavior. This whole entire conversation is about boundaries. People often don't like boundaries. They don't like giving them. They don't like being told boundaries. But keep in mind, you don't ever have to defend your boundaries twice. Once clearly stated, the second violation of those boundaries is a choice. Whether it's your choice to violate someone's boundaries or whether it's their choice to violate boundaries. But there's also the choice of exiting. That might be exiting the conversation. That might be exiting the relationship. You decide. When it comes down to boundaries and romantic relationships, we have to talk about those within intimacy. There has to be a protection of trust within a relationship, because a relationship is built on trust. And I know that sounds very cliche to say, but it's the simplest form. Relationships are built on trust, and you need to protect that trust. You or your partner can say no. You can say no to sex. You can say no to affection. You can say no to contact at that moment without guilt. Now, communication is also key here. If you find that you're saying no to something, you're putting up a boundary, explain why. Don't leave your partner hanging. But that same standpoint should apply to them, too. Now, you might have to pry a little bit from your partner if they're a bit more closed off, but your partner's communication should also give an explanation why. If they've said no to something, gently ask why. Don't demand it. And if you say no to something, you should be ready to explain that to your partner too. But don't ever feel guilty for saying no. Affection is a huge part of a relationship, but it should never be weaponized. What I found in past relationships is that affection was completely weaponized. I spoke about this in the first part of the podcast, where unless I did A, I didn't get B, which was affection. It was conditional. Affection should never be a reward or taken away as punishment. Love is never conditional on compliance. You can discuss your needs for affection or intimacy without shame. You should be having open talk about desire that builds trust. If there's something that you're holding back, or that your partner's holding back, that secrecy often tends to break the trust. As you progress in your relationships, you should be telling your partner what you enjoy. You shouldn't have the shame behind saying it, and they shouldn't be shaming you if they hear something out of your comfort zone. Now, keep in mind, if you or your partner have articulated something that the other person is not comfortable with, it doesn't mean that because you've articulated it, it has to be done. But you can express a desire for it. I'm just reading my note here, and I know this is a bit of a deviation from my structure that I have, but it goes back to the problems I discussed in that very first portion of the podcast and my first mistakes in a relationship, where I saw jealousy as passion. Jealousy doesn't equal love. If you have control but you're disguising it as passion, that's just going to kill intimacy, because that walking on eggshells, that nervousness builds up, and of course that carries itself into more intimate interactions. Don't ever use sex as leverage. If and when there's that mutual consensual aspect for it, it's trying to grow the relationship. Withholding it is control. It's emotional abuse. Now keep in mind, there's a differentiation between someone who has said no for a specific reason and someone who is purposefully withholding it because they expect it to be conditional on your compliance. I've given these boundaries. I've said that you have the right to say no. You have the right to walk away. You have the right to give a boundary. And if it's violated a secondary time, to exit. What do you do when you exit? How do you protect yourself when it's over? This is where a lot of people differ. They feel that closure is something that is a mutual discussion. It's not. And I'm going to emphasize this again, just as I discussed it in the very first portion of this. No closure is closure. You do not owe an explanation to someone who has repeatedly crossed lines. If you can have a good conversation, if you can have a healthy conversation, a discussion that closes out the conversation, absolutely have it. But if you find it's someone who's repeatedly crossing lines, crossing your boundaries that you've put out, you don't owe them anything. You don't owe them any communication afterwards. Silence is your protection, not their punishment. I'll say that again. Silence is your protection, not their punishment. Having no contact with them isn't cruelty. It's prioritizing yourself for recovery. So once again, no contact is not cruelty. It's respecting yourself enough to know that you need recovery, because a breakup is not a debate. It's a decision. You don't need permission to end pain. Majority of the time we talk about how to get into a relationship, how to woo someone, how to work within the relationship, but there's not a lot of discussion for what to do when it's ending. Keep in mind, you're autonomous. You do not need permission. Block, delete, move on without apology for anyone who has repeatedly crossed your boundaries. Your peace is earned by action, not discussion. My final message for you today: boundaries aren't barriers. They are standards. They tell people how to love you, how to respect you, and keep access to you. Without them, you'll mistake chaos for connection and exhaustion for effort. That's it for today's episode of From Chaos to Code, Rebuilding the Iron Mind. If something in this hit you, take a second to sit with it before you scroll away. Write it down, apply it, share it with a brother who might need to hear it. The whole goal here isn't perfection, it's progress. Real men doing the real work of getting stronger, clearer, and more grounded every day. If you want to keep these conversations going, subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen. And if you want to stay around after the episode, I'll be releasing tracks I've made using my own writing and AI music development. Each episode will feature a new track in a variety of genres that I use to express myself. Keep the chaos in check and keep the code alive. I appreciate all of you. Thanks for listening.
You say the right things at the wrong times. Love me in private, leave me in signs. Only show up when your silence runs dry. But I learned to read the lull in your eyes. If it had been real, I'd still be whole, not stitching my soul in the shape of control. You loved by condition, not by feel.